I think we will get started. So thank you everyone for making time on a Tuesday lunchtime on hopefully a nice day where you are. It's certainly sunny where I am, which is enjoyable, although a little bit cold. Thank you for making time to come along and listen to Kirsty and I on the aptly named How Not to Up Your Share Incentive Plans. I'm not sure I should be saying the middle word, but hopefully that capture your imagination. It's good to have you here. My name's Andrew Holloway. I'm a partner here in the tax team at Cooper Parry. I've been here for just around 2.5 years. We're building a team at Cooper Parry, a sort of multidisciplined tax team, and my team that I'm involved in do a lot of work in the equity reward space, so all things share plans. So yeah, super to be here, and over to Kirsty to say hello as well.
Hello, I'm a director in the equity reward team with Andrew. I've only been here for 6 months, but I've been working with high growth companies and all sorts of different share schemes, equity reward, venture capital, right across the board for the past almost 12 years, which feels like a very long time now. I'm based in Edinburgh, so I've worked a lot with Scottish businesses, but also across the UK as well. And I'm looking forward to hopefully imparting some of the knowledge and pitfalls that I've come across to try and avoid those happening again.
So we're talking about how not to mess things up, basically, and there are a lot of things you can do to mess up a share scheme. Just want to touch briefly on some of the key schemes that some of you will be aware of, or perhaps not so aware of, before we get into some of the detail. So people will no doubt, or hopefully, be aware of the two main HMRC approved option schemes, those being EMI and CSOP. EMI, Enterprise Management Incentives, tends to be the go-to share option plan for growing companies. It comes with some fairly attractive tax outcomes for the participants and reasonably benign qualifying conditions so that companies up to a certain size, certain age, certain stage can make use of it, with a key other point being that it's one of the best share schemes that probably exists around the world in terms of bringing on and incentivizing talent. That said, it can go spectacularly wrong when it goes wrong, and we'll cover some examples of that later on. There's CSOP, Company Share Option Plan, EMI's big brother, essentially. EMI, to go to, if you graduate from EMI, perhaps you get too big for EMI, or perhaps the trade you undertake doesn't quite meet EMI conditions. CSOP is something that you can build into. Tax benefits are reasonably good as well around CSOP, not quite where EMI was or is. And the other option plan that we see used a lot is unapproved option plans. This unapproved option plans, the beauty of them is simplicity. There's no qualifying conditions. Anyone can grant an unapproved option, probably to anyone, but with the downside that any growth in value on an unapproved option plan is not capital, which you get in EMI and CSOP, it's income. And that can come with some fairly hefty tax charges, particularly if you take an unapproved option plan from the start to the end. You think you're going to get a wonderful outcome, and it gets taxed like a bonus, and you feel a little bit sad. Over to Kirsty to cover some of the more direct or sort of direct equity plans.
Yeah, so some of the other things that we see or get asked to advise on are the award of direct equity. So, for example, ordinary shares, buy shares outright, get capital growth. I'll come to the drawbacks of that in a second. But a fairly straightforward one if it's done properly. Growth shares, so implementing some kind of hurdle. So you can only participate in value from those growth shares if the company reaches a certain value by a certain time, can be really useful for incentivizing those who don't qualify for EMI, or it can be used in conjunction with EMI and CSOP and can be quite a neat way of tying things up. And then we've also got phantom share schemes, which are essentially using basically the company value to derive a bonus value over a period of time with holding periods, vesting conditions, all sorts of things. Super flexible, super useful, and normally gets put in place where one of the kind of direct share schemes don't actually apply, and it's actually just going to be a bonus plan instead, but it gives you a bit more of a framework for it, which is very useful.
Yeah, so that That I think covers the key areas, things we see all the time, schemes we advise on all the time. But the title of this session is how not to F things up. So Kirsty, tell me, what does bad look like when it comes to implementing a share plan?
You know what? I think there's two sides to it. I think there's one side where you only think about tax, which is a very dangerous trap to fall into because you end up with something that isn't commercial, that might be too complicated, that doesn't actually give the value that you want to pass on at the end of the scheme. And actually might just not work. So it might be too tightly drawn because you're trying to get the best tax implications at the front end. And then by the end of the scheme, you're coming to a sale or something. You've written these incredible rules, these incredible kind of parameters, and suddenly what you're doing doesn't actually fit into them. And so the individuals could get nothing, but they've had a really low tax charge up front, so that's great. Or they just might not get what you want. And then you've got the other side of it, which is where the tax implications aren't thought about at all. And so you've got a share scheme that's been put in place, and then you go through a due diligence process and you find out that actually there's a whole load of tax problems that have arisen over the years. So you might have historic tax issues you've got to report to HMRC and try and sort out in advance of a sale, or you're going to have a really big tax charge on sale, which removes completely or almost completely the incentive that those individuals are meant to get. So those are the kind of two sides I would say. And different issues arise on both, but inevitably it means that the scheme hasn't done what you set it out to do.
Balancing tax with commercial and fully understanding what the intention of the individual or the people who are implementing the plan is. I would add to that that badly any plan, even if it's well intentioned and well executed, is only as good as the way the participants feel about it and understand it. And we've seen lots of examples where company goes to great effort and time and cost to put in place a growth shares plan or put in place an EMI plan. And then they go, brilliant, that's it, we can roll it out to the staff now. And the staff go, what is this? Or a few years down the line, one of your key people decides to leave. And you go, well, that's a bit annoying. We've paid them, but we've also put in place this wonderful equity plan. And they go, never understood that. Um, the the beauty in implementing a share plan properly is actually having the recipients knowing what it means for them and what it could mean for them and what they have to do to achieve that, ideally tying together everyone's objectives. And yet, what bad looks like is when at the end, the overall purpose is to get the old handcuffs on somebody and they just go, huh? And that's like a 101 for us. If that happens at the end, we've not done a job properly, you know? Um,
Communication is key.
so let's talk a little bit more about thinking about it before you implement, Kirsty. Um, what, how, say if you're a founder looking to kick off with a new plan, or if you've got an existing plan in place and looking to expand that plan, what do you think you should be thinking about when it comes to, say, this in a fundraise and you're looking to push forward with that next era of growth? What should you be thinking about when you're going to put in place that plan?
So my starting point would always be the commercial aspect. So where do you want to end up? What is your end game? Um, in some of the more complicated schemes, we would start with some kind of modeling to kind of look at what kind of return are those individuals going to get. And if you don't know what that return is going to look like, then you can't really design a scheme, I don't think, because you'll end up with something that might not be fit for purpose. So start with your end game. Where do you want them to end up with? Are you going to sell? Is there a reasonable expectation of a sale? If you're not going to sell, then how are you going to get some kind of incentive into their hands? Because you can set up a share scheme, but if there isn't a way to liquidate the asset, actually get cash for those shares, then what's it doing? So that's number one. Then we need to think about who the recipients are, what they're trying to get. And then we work back to, okay, what tax do we need to think about? And I do it in that order. So it's completely back to front for a lot of people, but I think it makes more sense.
I think it makes a lot more sense. And there are with the HMRC approved schemes. Let's think about EMI, for example. One of the key points around EMI is the option must be capable of being exercised within 10 years. We've seen companies in previous roles and current roles go on this supercharged growth story, but then all right, well, we gave these options to somebody. They're exit only options, as in they can only be exercised when an event takes place where shares are sold. We're 9.5 years in. The paper value of those options in theory is huge. Companies going through some fundraisers, growing, revenue generating, profit making, but the person physically can't exercise and participate in that equity. And the founder then goes, oh, but when we set it up, I never actually thought I was going to exit. This is a business I've wanted to grow and grow and grow forever. And then you're going, well, we should have thought about that at the start. We'd never have put in place that plan. But you can put in, if you even have an EMI plan, you can put in points that you can exercise and maybe start if you're not going to participate in capital growth, maybe dividend participation, etc. And that, particularly when we come across those schemes, say a new client comes into us, it's the most frustrating thing because you're going, yeah, great scheme. That scheme is a good scheme, but it's not the right scheme for the right situation, and it's not going to deliver what was intended. Interesting question for you, Kirsty, put you on the spot here. What do you make of schemes where people try to tell the participants what the outcome might be in terms of cash before they've gone and done the growth that needs to be done?
Do you know what? I actually talked about this the other day with someone where a client asked what they should tell the recipients in terms of what a future return might look like. And I said, if you want to communicate this incentive, giving an example of what might be achievable is totally fine. Giving them a number of we are going to do this and this is what it'll be worth is really dangerous because if you don't get to that point, you've completely disincentivized them. Or if something happens in the business, which means that it might be a bit of a setback, then people will think, oh, well, what I've got is worthless. So why don't I go somewhere else where I can get something better? Because in a lot of these businesses, it is a huge part of the remuneration package. It's you got your salary, but actually that future income as a result of a sale or some kind of capital event is what is actually keeping them with the business for the long term. So you've got to be realistic. Give them something, give them some explanation so they can understand what the scheme is and what it's worth and what it could do for them. But giving an answer of this is exactly what we're going to do step by step and where we're going to be, it's just not realistic.
Purpose of these schemes is to deliver positive returns, but if somebody goes, you're going to get a mill out of this, and it gets to the end and you get 800, the last thing you should be sad about is getting is the 200 delta based on the promise and a bit of paper at the start. So I'm the exact same as you. More than happy to do some worked examples and maybe a low, medium, and high case, but purely theoretical. Because the minute you stick something on a page saying you can expect to potentially get this back, is when you mess up the scheme because people the expectation becomes entitlement, and that entitlement becomes potentially very problematic. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, that's one of your key how not to mess things up. Don't over promise or over commit to people on what the scheme might deliver. Make the scheme part of your wider growth story, build it into people's goals and objectives, but be realistic that certain things have to happen with you all working together to get there, and it isn't just an entitlement to cash automatically at the
I
end.
think I think also coming back to that previous point where we talked about schemes where it's exit only, and then people come to the end of that period and say, "Oh, it's exit only, and now it doesn't work." Um, it's thinking about those what ifs at the beginning. So, what if we don't exit? What if we don't exit in that time? What if the market crashes and things aren't going to work at the right time for us? Do we need to write something into the rules so that it is exit only, really? But actually, there's a what if function in there that means that you can actually do something else if it's necessary and it's not just a complete waste.
So, particularly for you and mine, that's the key thing, isn't it? If you
Yeah.
write it all into the rules and into documents up front and build in some flexibility, great. If you come to try and amend EMI documents, there are people on this call who have maybe gone through diligence, advisors, etc. Amending EMI documents isn't a hard no, but any kind of material amendment, and HMRC tell you what's immaterial, so you can work out there's a lot of things about material. It's just an absolute no. And we get that sometimes, oh, we'll just change that. It's like, well, you can change it if you want, but you're changing all that capital tax treatment into income, and
Yeah.
that's not ideal. Um, Moving on then to the two HMRC approved schemes. So EMI is seen as a sort of the go-to, the most effective way. Low capital gains tax rates. You potentially can benefit from business asset disposal relief for your first million of gains. What are the two things, or what are the things, Kirsty, that you sort of watch out for companies who go, yeah, we're just going to do an EMI plan. We definitely meet the qualifying conditions. What are the qualifying conditions that you see that tend to trip people up, particularly as they shoot up the growth cycle?
So in the beginning, a lot of the qualifying conditions seem to be quite easy, and people will put into place a plan, and everything seems to work, and that's fine. The major thing that happens is actually throughout the journey, when you get a big investor come in and they get some kind of deal whereby they might be able to have more voting rights. So, say, for example, they've got a right that says you've got 40% of the shares, but actually you have 51% control by virtue of voting. Or you have more influence over the business than your shares actually entitle you to. That becomes an arrangement for control, especially if your investor is a corporate, and that disqualifies your scheme. So, danger point number one. And we see it all the time. And HMRC have actually just tightened up on this point and given some more parameters, which is very useful because it was very kind of broad before. And we just spent a lot of time going to HMRC and saying, do you think this is okay? Do you think this is okay? And they said, yes, no, maybe. And now we have a much kind of clearer view, which is good. But it still happens. So that's one area. In terms of other kind of disqualifying points, sometimes it's the kind of qualifying trade. In a lot of cases, the company understands what their trade is, it's totally fine. But sometimes there's things in there that just catch you out around licensing, around royalties, around leasing. Leasing is a big thing that's been coming up recently. If you're leasing assets, people say, "Oh no, it's fine because we've got other things going on. It's not the main trade." But if it's more than a certain proportion of the trade, then it is disqualifying, and companies don't necessarily realize that. And it might be the best revenue structure for a business that's creating something, but it might also ruin your share scheme. And just to throw another one in there, it might also ruin your SEIS or EIS.
That cross pollination of SSNS is key. I think that one of the things, particularly with EMIs, you can go for advance assurance to
Yeah.
confirm that your company qualifies, and we've certainly seen this in diligence of late. Historically, you can maybe, yeah, I've ticked the box and EMI, move on. We are seeing more basically providers go and prove that you qualified for EMI at points in time in your journey. And the reason why it's important is, say, things like headcount, you've got 250 full-time equivalents is your cap for EMI. Anything more than that, you can't do EMI. Gross assets of 30 million is your cap out for EMI. If you've got gross assets more than 30 million, go beyond. Why not, at the point when you're looking to do something, go and ask HMRC to sign off on it? It's a bit like advanced assurance for the EIS, isn't it? Why wouldn't you do it? And in terms of how not to F things up, could we go back to the title? If you've got an opportunity at the start of your scheme to do something that makes it diligence ready and future diligence proof, why would you not do it? Because if you then have to start scrambling around to prove that your gross assets were below 30 million 5 years ago, the worst time to have to either find out you've not considered it properly or to be going through those hideous calculations is when you're under the pump on due diligence. The last one I think that people in CSOP tend to miss is that to lock in the tax benefits for CSOP, you, in nearly all cases, need to have held the options for 3 years. You can, in some cases, exit CSOP options early and still get capital treatment, but in the main, you've got a 3 year holding period. So going back to planning your scheme properly, if you've not done your option award, you want to exit in 24 months, and you're too big for EMI, then you've run out of options because your CSOP will probably not deliver to you you'd hope, and I don't know about you, Kirsty, but I just sometimes feel it's a bit of a jigsaw. Like we're having to, well, yeah, here, no, there, and it's just trying to plug all the different things together to make sure that we give the best advice, but people don't miss out on opportunities as well.
Yeah, I mean, timing is everything. There's been so many situations over the years, I could come up with so many examples of situations where, say for example, a company has gone and got a valuation agreed with HMRC for EMI, but actually before they granted the options, they took an investment round and then at a much higher valuation than they agreed the EMI at. And then when DD's been underway, someone's looked at it and said, so that wasn't really the right valuation because you didn't agree before, or you didn't agree that investment round as part of that exercise. And so they're saying HMRC won't find it valid, and you think, oh, right, okay, how do we mess this up? Or you get too close to a potential sale, you've got a term sheet on your desk, or maybe one person in the business has a term sheet on the desk, maybe the person at the top, and the person who's running the EMI is maybe the FD or the CFO, and maybe they're not directly involved in that. Getting EMI put in place, and then suddenly, I actually have had this where I was involved in a DD, and the two parties hadn't been talking. We'd put in an EMI, and then they found out, oh, it actually wasn't qualifying and wasn't going to work. And things had to be reconsidered. And I mean, the only option at that stage really is some kind of unapproved option or a bonus, which obviously then impacts everything on sale. And I can tell you, my favorite thing about my job, not so favorite thing, is that in a deal, it's always EMI and employment related securities that are the last thing to be dealt with. And they are the late night phone calls panicking about what tax charges are coming up. I spent many an evening trying to sort things out and agree things in the SPA at the very last second.
And kind of that's the benefit of taking good advice and getting up front with these kind of schemes and that doing that up front, legal counsel, taking on board what your investors are saying, taking on board tax advisors saying, getting a valuation done, looking at advance assurance, doing all those fiddly bits at the back end that you think are fiddly but are actually mission critical. We're going to come and talk about them later because they're the worst things not to do when it comes to HMRC approved and indeed other share schemes as well. But just on the legal side then and on the papering side, I'm sure you've seen examples, and I definitely have, where people have got this wonderful idea as to what their share plan's going to be, then they don't paper it properly. And or they go, yeah, yeah, brilliant, right, we've done it now, and they move on to the next thing, they move on to the next fundraise, move on to going to get customers, they move on to building pipeline, to hiring staff, and then the EMI or the CSOP documents or the growth share documents either don't get done at all or they get done slapdash quickly and you don't get and everyone goes, oh no, or they don't, what's been papered or what you decide you're going to do and what's been papered are completely different. I bet you've seen that a few times.
Oh my word. Yes, so I'm sure we've got a few lawyers on the call at the moment, but they'll be hopefully echoing what I say here that the benefit of speaking to a lawyer in person who understands what an option agreement is meant to look like and what it's meant to say and can translate what you want your scheme to look like into the right terminology on a piece of paper is the most important thing. You can go and download a template option agreement or you can use one that you've used before, you can copy and paste. But if you don't have the relevant experience or understanding of what you're putting on that paper, I would say at least 9 times out of 10, and that's probably quite reserved, it's going to go wrong. And that's because there's if buts and maybes that apply everywhere. I personally wouldn't draft a legal option agreement. It's just not my wheelhouse. I will absolutely always refer someone to someone that knows much better than I. I can do all the tax side of things. And I've seen a million option agreements and I've reviewed them and considered them and made sure they're right for what we want. But the ability to actually translate that, like I say, is so important. And you get off the shelf documents and things, and particularly if you're doing EMI or CSOP and including growth shares, different share structures, you've got different share classes in place. You're looking at different performance criteria, vesting conditions. It's a big job, and there's a reason the specialists out there. You're better to pay them than pay the price later.
That point around paying, taking a little bit of pain now in terms of cost against the potential downside risk and cost later on is so significant. The we can link between a couple of things we talked about. If you have an idea that a plan's going to deliver X, and it comes to that exit event, and you go, brilliant, Kirsty, we talked about it at the start. We were going to get you 500,000 out, and look, we're going to get you 500,000 out. We're going to get it out at capital rates. Isn't that amazing? And then somebody comes and picks through it and goes, well, Kirsty hasn't signed their option agreement, or the mechanism that you put in place in the option agreement actually says that Kirsty's only going to get 200 out. And we see it time and time again that it what's been papered doesn't actually link back to aspiration, or it's just been done wrong. There is a place for platform documents, I'm sure somewhere. But for me, and Kirsty said it all as well, good quality papering of your intention from a legal perspective is absolutely critical to implement a share plan that is fit for purpose, robust, and will get you through to the exercise point through diligence, with everybody getting out what they think they're going to get out.
Absolutely. And I mean, put it into perspective. I mean, you're looking at capital treatment at something like 18%, or you're looking at income tax treatment when you chuck in the employer's national insurance, which is normally passed on to the individual, at over 58%. I mean, that's horrible. If I've been promised £500,000, I am not looking to spend 58% of that on tax. Sorry, HMRC.
And coming back to perhaps more our side of the fence is tax valuation, Kirsty, an area that we spend an absolute ton of time, and you in particular in your career have spent a load of time on. I'm going to throw a few things at you. I'm going to put in place some growth shares, Kirsty, and because there's a hurdle, the valuation's nothing, and we don't need to think about it too much. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
Tell me why I'm
You want
wrong.
more than that?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So actually, we were on the share and asset valuation chat with HMRC last week, where they hammered home the point that that is wrong. If you have a growth share valuation or you have a growth share put in place, if I'm looking to acquire shares that have a hurdle value and it's based on value at future exit, HMRC will always expect that you look forward. I don't look back at trading history to look at what the valuation of those shares are and say, okay, the hurdle's 10 million, but currently the company's not doing well, and so we maybe be able to achieve 5 million. That doesn't mean they're worthless. We have to look forward and think, right, at the point that I might actually get something, what might the company be worth then? And so I've done it countless times. I've had so many phone calls with clients saying, yeah, but obviously it's zero. We just need you to write a piece of paper that says it's zero. And the answer is absolutely not, because HMRC won't accept it. When you go too aggressive on growth shares, HMRC will look straight into it. It gets pulled up, especially if you're issuing shares directly and you actually can't get an agreement with HMRC on valuation upfront. It's that DD point yet again. You're going to have to go back and look at tax implications, and it's expensive. So it's everyone has this firm belief that that is how it works. And the fact is, it's just not. We have to take into account so many different things. So when we're doing evaluation, we look at multiple scenarios of what could happen in the future. And okay, you're not necessarily going to pay, or the value isn't necessarily going to be exactly what you might get in the future. There's other calculations involved in working out what that's worth today. But the answer isn't just zero, unfortunately.
It's probably worth explaining then, just covering back for EMI and for CSOP, we can go to HMRC and agree valuations up front. For EMI over growth shares, as an example, we can go to HMRC and agree the valuation up front. That is a super bit of paper to have, although they are going wildly quickly on approvals currently.
I think it's
So
our name on them, right? We're going to take that. We're
yes,
going to pretend it's
surely.
because it's our
Um,
name on them.
82 minutes, I think, was the record approval in the last couple of weeks. So, I mean, they are, HMRC, just as a general point, are working pretty quickly when it comes to tax valuation approval, currently seem to be up to speed. And, Kirsty mentioned the share and asset valuation session hosted last week. Good session, some good insight. For growth shares, pure straight growth shares, there's no method of agreeing the valuation of a growth share upfront with HMRC. And as I said, I'm going back again. the worst point to have to justify your valuation is when you've not done it at the start and you're having to justify it at the end on a diligence where you issue your groceries at nominal. Kirsty, show us your valuation paper. Oh, well, we just raised it 10 and we put a hurdle of 10.5. So yeah, of course it was nominal. It it won't work. It won't play. There may be situations in theory where growth shares could come out at nominal value, but if I was designing that scheme, I would be looking at the hurdles and going, are the hurdles ridiculous to the point that they actually don't fulfil the incentive? But in simple terms, hurdle higher, tax valuation lower. Um, but in terms of participation, hurdle higher, everyone has to do more to achieve the hurdle. Is it going to incentivize people to go above and beyond and deliver? Is it going to act as that pair of golden handcuffs? Or are they going to go after a couple of years? Scrap that. I'm going to go elsewhere.
Well, it
So
comes back to that commercial point, doesn't it? Like you might have a zero valuation up front and say, right, okay, guys, it's great. You've got no tax to pay now. But then the commercial part doesn't work because on exit they might not be entitled to anything. So it's the balance again.
balancing out, but again, it comes back to, in terms of not effing it up, taking good advice at inception, to make sure that you understand. You know, we do a lot of these schemes, but it's use us as your buffer to go, right, what's normal here, what should we be doing here, and what are you seeing in that downside situation? An upside situation, I love talking about upside situations, but the things that Kirsty talked about the late nights. You don't do late nights in upside situations because everybody's happy and it's worked as it's supposed to. You do the late nights, the difficult deals, when something's gone wrong, and
Absolutely.
people might think we're smiling, thinking, "Oh, look at all these war stories we got." It ain't fun at the time. It's not fun when people aren't getting what they thought they were going to get. With valuation so critical. Another point, and it's actually, pardon me, sorry, it's actually very timely given it's March and we're about to move into annual reporting season, um, for things like notifications need to happen, annual returns need to get filed. Um, Tell me, Kirsty, when a notification of an EMI option isn't filed or an annual return for CSOP isn't done, what kind of problems do you see arising on diligence?
Treated as an unapproved option in a lot of cases. If I was on the other side, I've been the good guy and the bad guy, right? I've been on both sides of DD. I've been defending the company and trying to make sure that the other side are happy with our position and going to HMRC to do things like reasonable excuse claims. And there was a good 3 years where basically COVID could be punted in as a reasonable excuse, and they were pretty flexible, and they have shut that door completely. It is very much a Hail Mary now to go for a reasonable excuse claim for not having done your reporting. But in most cases, if you haven't done your reporting properly, it's getting treated as unapproved. And then you're back to that 58% tax charge that I mentioned earlier. And actually, I think 58% is wrong now. It was something around that, but now that national insurance has gone up, it might be slightly higher. And it's exactly that same point. If someone, even at the outset of a deal, if someone thinks, say you've got uh, a COO has come in and they've got this deal and they understand what the deal means for them. They've got enough information about the business and to know what the process looks like. And they think, right, I've gone and done my calculations and I think I'm gonna get about 500,000 here. And then they realise throughout that deal that they are not getting 500,000. They're getting 500,000 less the 58% tax they're going to have to pay. Well, they're not going to be very happy. And you've got a real danger critical point in terms of if those individuals are required to move the business forward after the acquisition and they're not happy anymore, well, your buyer's not going to be happy either. So it doesn't actually suit anyone. So, I mean, it seems ridiculous that a notification to HMRC, which I promise is a fairly simple process, can really mess something up so much. But that bit of administration is so important.
DMI, for example, advance assurance is not mandatory. You don't need to do it. Not that many do, more should. Tax valuation, nearly all do it, but again, it's not mandatory. You don't need a tax valuation to grant an EMI option. So the only thing that you need to do is tell HMRC about it. And historically, there was that glorious have to do it for 92 days. You now don't even have the excuse that, oh, I missed my 92-day window. You now just have to tell them about it by 6th of July following the tax year in which the options were granted. If I was a CFO, FD of any business, I would just be saying to people, right, what have we done in the last year? Even if you've not told us, just what paperwork have you put in front of people? Because if you think you're going to get that kind of tax outcome, we need to do this bit. This bit is not the annoying bit. We have to remember your HMRC password, go through annoying two-factor authentication, and pop some stuff into a spreadsheet. Without doing it, you're not going to be able to benefit from the tax advantages and the tax wrapper that's popped around EMI and CSOP in particular. Can I come to growth shares, Kirsty?
My favourite.
And the joys of a Section 431 election. I am not going to ask you to try and explain the relative merits of a Section 431 election in the last few minutes of this presentation before we open up for questions. But I'll put this one to you. I'll just sign a Section 431 election at some point in the future, and that'll be fine. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me I'm right there.
You're absolutely wrong. You have to sign a Section 431 election within 14 days of getting the shares, otherwise it is not valid. Now, you can actually sign the Section 431 election before you get the shares, and that is a great plan, because then you are covered. So in the process of setting up the scheme, just get it signed. It's the easiest thing. You're signing other agreements, it's one extra signature. It's so straightforward. But it means that you're not going to have a significant tax charge under PAYE and NIC on the sale of the shares. And I could explain it. There is a really good analogy around Section 431s, and if anyone wants to hear it at some point, I'll send it somewhere. And it's about paying the tax on a bet. And I believe before my days of gambling, not that I'm a big gambler, but sometimes I like to put a pound or two on the rugby. You used to pay tax on your gambling. So you could choose to pay the tax up front on whatever you were spending. In fact, I'm just going to tell you, you could choose to pay the tax up front on what you were spending, or you could pay tax on the winnings. Now, tax on the winnings is inevitably higher than tax on the spend. So Section 41 is essentially that. You're choosing to pay tax on the acquisition cost rather than tax on the sales cost or the sales price because you're going to pay less upfront. It makes sense, it's very useful, but you have to sign the bit of paper to be able to do it. Otherwise, it is completely worthless. And again, it's just the administration point. It's a piece of paper that stays on file. It doesn't even go to HMRC. So everyone's like, well, why would I do it? What's the point? Just keep it in a filing cabinet somewhere. I mean, I keep saying filing cabinet as if we're still back in the 2000s. Like, we've got Google Drive, we've got modern platforms. Just email it to someone. But it's just one of those things, and every advisor will mention it. It'll be included in all documentation because lawyers will mention it in things like option agreements, share acquisition agreements, anything like that. But unless you're a tax nerd, who knows what Section 431 even means? But it's something that we harp on about all the time, and there's a template readily available online to make it super easy.
So it's one of those templates, the one online in general, is on HMRC. It's actually a good template. Populate, sign, pop it in the drawer. As you say, it doesn't even go to HMRC, but being able to open the drawer at the exit point and go, look, we've done it, can save a lot of pain. Because again, it's not even like, oh, we definitely did it, but I can't find it. The general expectation on diligence is if you can't find it and prove it, it doesn't exist. And then instead of having that percentage of tax based on your bet at the start, you've got a percentage of tax based on your winning bet at the end, and that spread tends to be a lot bigger. And I've got one live right now where it's painful, and we're arguing a percentage difference, and it's challenging. And referred this point right through the presentation. The worst time to be having debates about the effectiveness of your share plan implementation is at the end, when it comes to a winning event.
I guess the key point with any share scheme is you've got the HMRC rules and you've got the due diligence rules. Due diligence rules are actually, in a lot of cases, harsher than the HMRC rules on what is required, what kind of information you need to have available. And unfortunately, people doing DD are people like us who understand this stuff very well. We're going to do whatever we can to protect our client. And so we're probably going to start at the worst possible scenario, aren't we? And we're going to make it the harshest thing possible. Not because we're trying to be unfair, but because we want things to be right and we're trying to protect the acquirer. So people will go online and say, well, HMRC says I don't have to do this in terms of getting a valuation or getting advance assurance. No, but the DD on the other side absolutely will want it. So it's a slightly different set of parameters to look at.
So we've just ran through 5 key areas, and it's coming up to 1:45. I think 40 minutes of talking is about the sweet spot here. We've covered some important areas, thinking it through before you get started, making sure the plan that you're looking to use actually works for you and fits you, taking proper high quality legal counsel on the drafting of the documents, making sure you understand the need for a tax valuation, the purpose of it, how it should be presented and done, because there's bad actors out there, and why it's important, and dealing with the admin at the back, or the admin, the fiddly bits, the annoying things. I'm currently we did a little bit of work in our house recently, and I left the building warrant final sign off a year, right? These things get harder in time because you can't remember what at the time. See, if I'd just done it and gone, right, I need to close this off with the planning team at the council at the point in time when things had finished, my life would have been a lot easier than a year later having to scratch through my emails, scratch through my files, and go, where is this document? Having to phone people, get myself in a bit of a puff about it. That's a real life example from the poor admin function of the Holloway household, which you didn't need to hear. But it's a real life example of, if you don't put in place that good practice, push it around it, you end up with an outcome that perhaps you didn't really want. If you nail these things though, and you get these things right, a well-designed, well-executed, well-understood option/equity plan can be so valuable in terms of achieving commercial, strategic, investor, personal objectives. Any final comment, Kirsty, before we open up, hopefully, for some questions? We've got chat function, we've got Q&A function. If anyone wants to ask Kirsty and I anything about the topic at hand, we're more than happy to help.
I guess my final comment is more that we've talked about all the scary things that can go wrong, but we've also seen lots of examples of where it's gone really right. And it is a really cool thing. Like, obviously, I wish I was part of these companies. I wish I was part of a selling company and getting an EMI option that's been successful. But there are plenty of scenarios where every box has been ticked, everything's been done properly, and the design has worked perfectly. It's not all doom and gloom, and they're incredibly valuable. It's just spend a little bit of extra time at the beginning and make sure it's done right, and it'll be a breeze moving forward.
I cannot see any questions, and I'm not sure whether that's because we've talked people into submission or we've done such a good job in explaining the topic. Does anyone have anything burning from that presentation that they want to ask us? Or is it, yeah, I'm looking at the open question, I'm looking at the chat, I can't see anything, but here we go. Oh, Lewis, that's very kind of you. Lewis has said no questions, but thank you very much for the presentation. I like those kind of ones, Lewis. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, so Anna Hewitson, Kirsty has asked, what is the number one error you see from lawyers? Wow, that's a really good question.
That's a very good question. Um, Sometimes it's just overcomplicating things. So I think sometimes the things I've seen have been trying to make a scheme as advanced as possible and do everything you want it to do, because you're writing down basically exactly what the company wants you to do, and then actually it hasn't necessarily worked and hasn't thought about that commercial aspect, or the lawyers have gone ahead and not thought about the tax side of things. Things have been missed off. On an EMI option, I've had loads of different cases, things like definitions being wrong. Like, that's such an easy thing to get wrong. And it meant one we dealt with years ago was it mentioned the company, but actually there was a group of companies. and people were moving between the group in different companies because they were having to move different kind of roles and things like that. And so the option agreement didn't actually work for them because it didn't work for the company anymore. And so their options were disqualified. We managed to get a good answer from HMRC in the end and they took pity, but it's little quirky things that just can get picked up along the way.
The next question, actually, Kirsty, is a really nice segue into that one. Gavin Charlton's asked, how flexible are you finding HMRC when you have to approach them to try and fix things at the end? Kirsty and I are both probably involved in the odd approach to HMRC here and there. Nothing is certain in life, I would say. So you're not going to HMRC on a one-way bet. You're not going to HMRC for, all right, sorry guys, we didn't do the notifications. Or I had a classic recently where the way the option contract was written was that it lapsed immediately before the point it could be exercised. It was just a careless bit of wording. Um, so actually, and the option had been done in house, and it was lawyers who flagged it, the option was incapable of exercise. Clearly, that was never the intention. And in that situation, we wrote to HMRC, we said, look, we've got a rogue clause 9.3. 9.3 is a nonsense clause. You'd never have put it in. We didn't mean to put it in, or we didn't mean for it to be there. Can HMRC sort of bless the fact that the option agreement will stand and we'll strike out that clause? And yeah, in that situation, HMRC came back, yeah, of course, no problem, but you can't guarantee it.
I
And
think
there's probably two things, Gavin, as well, just to add to that before Kirsty jumps in. One is you can't guarantee it, and two, even if you think you might get a good answer, you cannot get any guarantee on timing of that response. And if you're hurtling towards completion and you want a fast answer, apart from the HMRC share and asset valuation team, we're not finding anybody else particularly quick in terms of responding.
absolutely. And in terms of flexibility, I think it's exactly the point that Andrew just mentioned. But if it's something that is clearly an accidental inclusion or something where it was never set out in the first place, it was just a silly mistake or bad wording or something like that, HMRC are a bit more flexible. They're a good team and they understand the stuff very well, and they're not looking to try and kind of ruin the impact of a share scheme. But if you're trying to amend something because what you designed in the first place just isn't what you've ended up with, they're kind of less likely to be so forgiving.
I've got a final question. I've answered some other thank people saying thank you very much for the session. That's no problem at all. Paul Gregg has asked, where a company has a share incentive scheme for ordinary shares, but half of the business value is preferred shares, how could that look for the share option holders in the event of a transaction?
So, in terms of the return of capital, the share option holders, if they're getting only ordinary shares, they'll participate in any value above what part of the value goes to the preferred shares. Preferred shares. Can't talk now, been too long. Yeah, so it's basically a waterfall. So you take out the preference first and then split any remaining value between the rest of the shares according to whatever's been set out in the return of capital waterfall in the articles. So it means that they won't get a kind of full pro rata share of the business, essentially.
Back to the point again, it comes to good drafting, isn't it? That things have been put in the right spot so that they can the return flows through. So, Paul, I hope that answers your question. If there's anything that we've not covered there, Paul, that'd be useful. Just you know where we are. So, thanks everyone for making it along today. Really appreciate it. Oh, perfect answer, said Paul. Thanks. Well, Kirsty nailed it. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming along. Hope you found the session useful, insightful. You know where Kirsty and I are. If you ever need anything, want to chat through something, soundboard something, we're here to help, here to support. We've got a great team that we've built out to 9 people as of about 6 weeks' time, who can really help you get into the skin of these things and support. Thank you again. Lovely to not see you all. Hope we've dealt with the topic well, and we'll catch you all soon. Okay. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks so much.